All right, welcome back to Horror Talks Live. Joining us tonight is American film director Tom McLoughlin. Tom, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
No problem. Okay. So, before we get grinding, one thing I'd like to point out to you is this is going to be one of the most interesting interviews I've ever conducted. Okay. Given the fact that your
Somebody
life,
else here?
oh, what was that?
I said somebody else here. I don't know who you're talking about.
Oh, no, you. Okay. And so this will be the most interesting interview. Given the fact that your life had started in the 1960s, that decade I've always considered as the most interesting. We're talking about, you know, um, the Manson murders, the moon landing, the Woodstock event, and of course, Roger Corman's adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe's famous and classic poems. I came prepared.
Yep, that's great. He's the man.
He sure is. Okay. And he'll always be the master of horror. Okay. So a lot of things had happened during that decade. Okay. And so, and the list just goes on. So we'll start there and we'll walk through the years, leading up to the mid 80s where your career had reached its toughest peak. All right. So basically, you were born in 1950 in Santa Monica, California, correct?
Yep.
All right. Okay. And by the late 60s, you weren't always a film guy. You weren't always like into acting. You were actually involved in rock music. You had your own band, and you actually opened for the Doors. Um, who else? The Animals, the Chicago Transit Authority, and other prominent groups on the Sunset Strip Boulevard. Okay. Now, if you will, share with us your experiences with these bands, starting with the Doors.
Well, I can't say a lot about the band other than I thought their music was amazing, and our group had opened for them like three different times. And there was always some interesting thing that Mr. Morrison would do in terms of trying to get him onto the stage, because he was always someplace else and the band's up there ready to play. And where's Jim? So, I mean, and I talked to him a couple of times, but it was very much like talking to somebody that is just not quite there, in
Right,
terms
right,
of alcohol or weed or whatever he was taking. So
right.
I can't say I got to know him. The other guys were very nice and things, but really didn't have much conversations with them. It really was about, I mean, dude, we were like 15, 16 years old. The fact we were playing these clubs was kind of amazing. And so, if somebody came in and they were just starting, their first album had just come out. So they were not, the iconic Doors that we've come to know. Uh,
Right.
but their way of approaching music is sort of like our other heroes of the Sunset Strip, the group Love. They found a different way to make it sound and different types of rhythm and things. And of course, there was a lot of jazz in what, the Doors were doing in their music. And of course, Jim's poetry was really unique. So from that standpoint, they really made a difference in the music scene.
They really did, and I liked their blending of the organ music with the guitar music, and it helped create that dark, eerie sound that they tended to latch onto throughout their whole musical careers. And
Yeah.
when you mentioned about Jim Morrison being like to himself, not that talkative, I kind of picked up on that when I watched his concert, because in between songs, he didn't say much to the audience. He like turn his back to them and pay special focus to the band members, and so he was kind of like a little introvertish a little bit, but very talented. Okay, I'll say that. So, but basically, I did see the Oliver Stone picture, of the Doors, and I find it fitting how um, Stone had shown the Death Angel following Morrison, everywhere he had gone, because basically he did flirt with death throughout his whole career, his musical career, and I read where he had accepted any drug that was given to him, either by anyone, strangers, and I thought that was pretty horrifying. So,
That
uh,
was that was the period, yeah, because it didn't
mindset.
matter how old you were if you were walking on the Sunset Strip, or you went to somebody's house in Topanga or whatever, somebody would come over to you and hand you something, a
Wow.
pill of some sort, weed of some sort, and it's like, take it. Well, what is it? Just take it. Well, what's going to happen? Just take it. You'll see. And we would. I mean, it was that crazy. So sometimes those capsules had glue in them. God knows what else, probably rat poison. It was, that teenage period of testing out your bravery to do this, and then also the psychedelic world of taking LSD and stuff. That also was that whole thing of opening up another side of your life, seeing things that you would never see without having a drug in you. But like most, people from that period, either they grew out of it, they died as a result of it, or they just kind of vanished, went back to their spaceship or whatever. But it was a really, as they say, trippy time. And kind of I was sort of like Forrest Gump in a way that I somehow managed to be at the right place at the right time. So like I was front row center with my best friend, Chris Mancini, who was Henry Mancini's son. And we had a band called the Avengers. Mancini gave us front row tickets to Monterey Pop. So as 16-year-olds sitting there watching The Who, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, all these incredible jazz performers, blues performers, soul performers. I mean, it just was life changing. So, to happen to be there for that, and then being invited to some video that they were doing, and it was Jimi Hendrix, doing Purple Haze. And you're sitting there going, holy shit, I'm in the same room with Jimi Hendrix, who I had just seen in the Monterey Pop, shows. So there was just a lot of that. Just happen to be in the right place at the right time to meet up with somebody or something. Completely, ionic for the period.
Right. I mean, the names you just mentioned, are very, very iconic people, and but you did also attend an event called the iconic. It's called the Monterey Film Festival in Dodge Stadium, where the Beatles were present, and you were there. Is that
No,
right? No, because that's where I
no,
got.
sorry. I saw the Beatles at Dodger Stadium. That's
Okay,
true. The Monterey Pop was the thing I just mentioned, the
right.
rock and roll show that
Correct.
had all those incredible people. I saw Michael Jackson and the Jacksons at Dodger Stadium too, which was quite an amazing thing
Cool.
back in the
Sorry,
day.
sorry about that little glitch. I got my information a little jumbled up. Okay. So you opened up for these groups, you performed. All right. Then when the music scene ran its course, right, you then journeyed to Paris, France to learn to become a mime. Is that correct?
Well, it is in the 50s. My father was a magician and a fire eater. So the influence was being a magician. And so I would do magic shows as a kid. And I also had the back lots of MGM to make my little 8 millimeter movies on with my friends. And so on the weekends, we would sneak under the fence and, shoot. So it was like I wanted to make films. I was doing magic. And then the Beatles and the Stones and those guys hit in '62, and my whole life shifted, into wanting to be a rock star because that's how you got the girls. You had to have your hair long, so my
Right.
hair was nowhere the length it is now, but just touching the ears. So I got kicked out of 8 high schools in Los Angeles for having long hair and not cutting it.
Right.
Um, so, I reached a point where I just went, all I want to do is, be a rocker. So, screw school and continued on, with pursuing my career. But at a certain point, I realized, Jagger's Jagger, James Brown's James Brown. I have to create my own style. And that's when somebody said the way I was performing reminded them of like mime, which I didn't even know what the word meant. So happened that Marcel Marceau came to Los Angeles. I went and saw his show. I thought, it's not for me with the white face and stuff, but, I'll go back and say how much, I was impressed.
Right.
He said, why don't you come to Paris and come to my school? And I went, oh, okay. And I was 19. I took the one and only straight job I've ever had in a warehouse packing stuff and got as much money as I could and, off to Paris in 1969 through 1970. So that was where the mime thing then became my career. Because rock and roll had really changed drastically with the psychedelic era coming in. And instead of doing rhythm and blues stuff, which is what our band was into because of the influence of the Stones, the Yardbirds, the Animals, suddenly it was now about feedback
Correct.
and noise. And, you know, like you mentioned, the Manson situation happened in 69. All of my heroes were dying, you know, at 27, you know, Janis, Jimmy, Keith Moon, Morrison. So I thought, you know, maybe I shouldn't be in this world. And the mime thing sort of became, you know, my career. And I worked on the streets of Los Angeles with a hat down, and whatever I made is how I ate that night. And eventually, my name somehow got to Woody Allen, and he wanted to find mimes to play robots for his movie Sleeper. So that was kind of a different course of being in suits. I was a Jabberwocky in Alice in Wonderland. I was Captain Star in The Black Hole. And, you know, I was a kind of a mechanical toy in Lily Tomlin's Incredible Shrinking Woman. So I had all these just weird jobs, um, and Mutated Bear and Prophecy, you know, and so these were tough stunt kind of jobs, but it did provide a living where people were saying, why the hell do you want to go to Paris and learn mime? What are you going to do with it? And I said, well, I'll figure out something. And it kind of worked that way. But my film influence never went away. I kept going to movies. I kept writing things and stuff. Finally, you know, come, I guess it was 1979, finally, One Dark Night, you know, my first feature film, we managed to get funding for it. And then by 80, I was kind of off into the wonderful world of being a filmmaker.
Right, right. So I was going to bring that up about the One Dark Night. Okay, especially the fact that it was filmed at the Hollywood Memorial Park Cathedral Mausoleum. You know,
Right.
which I saw in that video you had sent me. You know,
Mhm.
very nice looking place. You know, I don't know if you read my message on that video, but I had made a pretty good analogy where it looks like it, where it's more of akin to a pyramid. You know, for the film icons, you know, to rest eternally. But anyhow,
Yeah,
One Dark Night.
that's where I'm going to be for eternity. I'm in no hurry. You know, my goal is 2050, so I can make it to where my good friend Dick Van Dyke made it to 100. So I'm trying to keep as healthy as I can to keep going. But my crypt is already paid, waiting with the plaque on there. It's part of the, you know, the tour that they, when they do Hollywood Forever Cemetery, that the Cathedral Mausoleum, you know, has this red crypt plate with my name on it and quotes like "To die will be an awfully big adventure, Peter Pan." So I'm very much about what's on the other side, and that initially started from Poe when I first started reading Edgar Allan Poe at 12. So
Oh,
that's I've never got away from that kind of gothic horror, that dark side with a little sense of humor.
you'll be around for a long, long time. Just want to throw that in. All right. So,
Thanks.
all right. So, as your directorial debut, what was the biggest lesson you learned on One Dark Night that you applied to your later work?
Oh, well, I certainly made a lot of mistakes. I was very prepared, which I tried to keep doing through all the rest of my career. Shot, you know, having shot lists and drawing things so that I had a visualization before stepping onto the set. But if something happened and you go, well, that's much better, you know, than what I was thinking, I would go with that. I had a great DP whose rule always was, you know, whoever has the best idea wins. And sometimes it's a guy that was doing craft service, but throw something out and I go, that's it. That's better than anything I came up with. We'd do that. So I tried to really make, you know, making a film as collaborative as possible, but still somebody had to be at the helm, which is the director's job. And if I wrote it, then I had a particularly, you know, definite idea what I wanted to do. But I always would surrender to an actor who has an incredible frame of reference in their own life, and they can bring that emotional aspect, you know, to the part. And a lot of that I did learn on the first movie, and also just how difficult it is to make, a special effect, low budget movie with, under $1 million and build sets and corpses and all the stuff that we had in that crazy thing. And then to get a PG was the last thing I expected. But the turnaround on that was now, all these years later, I meet these people that go, I got into film because of that. I saw that when I was 8 years old. I said, "What are you watching at 8 years old?" He goes, "Because it was PG." And my grandmother took me, figuring there's nothing wrong with it. And for the first, I guess, I don't know, hour and 15 minutes or so, yeah, it's pretty talky and suspense and stuff. And then once the crypts open up, then it's pretty much pedal to the metal. And that's what scared, these kids.
I bet. I've yet to still watch that movie. I bet you it's really good, and it's on my A list. Now, I did watch your other movies, though, but your first one I've yet to see, and
Uh,
so I got something to look forward to here. All right, so we're going to move on to Friday the 13th, Part 6. Jason Lives. I got the iconic poster right here. There he is.
oh,
His
yeah.
gravestone. All right. So one thing you had done, and I read this in that book I showed you earlier, is that you added a unique blend of comedy and gothic horror to Jason Lives. Now, what was your initial goal, and how did you push back against the standard slasher formula?
Well, it's sort of the classic somebody else fucked up. And as a result, the door got open to somebody that they went like, I didn't want to make any slasher movies. I was tired of the whole genre. And particularly the sixth one of something. I had only seen part one, and I thought that was good. The fact Betsy Palmer was the murderer, and it was very different from Halloween, but much gorier. But then it just kind of, they kept dragging it out, as they did with Michael Myers and Freddy and Pinhead and all the other Chucky, kind of the iconic monsters of the 80s. And I've told this to people all the time. I said, those of us who were making those movies, we thought we were slumming doing these things, because the great movies had been done in the 70s, and why the hell weren't we in the 70s doing this stuff? So the 80s was sort of like, what do you want? Okay, I'll do that. And we made them the best that we could and put as much into it as we possibly could, but we never expected them to be like Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, any of the universal monsters that inspired all of us kids. But here we are. Yes, it is. I mean, the merchandising on all these characters and stuff, which of course none of us who created the things benefit from, but it is, they're really, really iconic characters. And Jason in particular, Halloween, it's so easy to get one of those plastic, hockey masks from any dime store and put that on, and, you got a costume and you're scary because you can't see your face. So I never expected this thing to be what it's become over all these years. But when I did accept the job, I said, "Can I put humor in it?" And he said, "This is Frank Mancuso Sr., who was in charge of all the Friday stuff." He said, "Just don't make fun of Jason." I said, "No, no, not at all. He's a monster. The kids are going to have a sense of humor, the teens and stuff. I'm going to make a little satire about the fact that it's the sixth one, which is what the James Bond opening is, because that was the great franchise. And I wanted to kind of let the audience know ahead of time, this is not going to be your typical slash, slice and dice every 5 minutes. I wanted you to get to like these characters. So when they did get killed, it was like, oh shit, I like that person. I didn't want to see him die. Where in the theaters at that time, there would be crowds that would come and they would just chant blood. They would cheer when the girls were being slashed up. That was, to me, the dark side of this. Not that they went out and imitated it. It was still just a thrill ride, but it was just uncomfortable, kill that bitch and that kind of stuff. I thought, no, I'm going to have equal amount of guys. I think I actually have a little more guys than I do girls. The nudity, the fact I didn't do nudity wasn't that I chose that. It was Darcy DeMoss, the actress who did the part in the motorhome. She just said, "Do you really need this? I'm kind of uncomfortable." I said, "You're uncomfortable? Don't do it. I don't want you to be uncomfortable and do the scene. I want the comedy to play." So I also have that thing attached to my name. Yeah, you're the dude that didn't do, any nudity. And I said, well, if you enjoyed the picture, I don't think you missed it. If that's why you came, sorry, that wasn't the movie I wanted to make.
And I like the ideas I like that you came up with and that you put into this film helped distinguish it from its predecessor, Part Five. You know, and so that's one thing I picked up on. Another thing I liked, and you just mentioned it, was getting the audience engaged with a favorite character. You know, getting them to like a character and then leading up to their kill, because that in itself helps them get more attuned with the film and rooting for the defeat of the villain or whatnot. And I thought that was a good strategy. And of course, I read that in this book. Friday the 13th. You called it the
Yeah.
Bible. Okay.
Yeah.
And,
Peter, made an incredible book. I mean, and he spent so much time with all of us, the interviews and how absolutely obsessed he was to get as much information and photos and things. And that just remains the best book on the series.
yeah, absolutely. Now, Tom, what was the inspiration behind the Frankenstein approach to bringing Jason back to life with the bolt of lightning?
Well, that's pretty much a no brainer. When I asked what he wanted from the next one, he said, you can do whatever you want, just bring back Jason. I said, well, that's easy. Bolt of lightning like Frankenstein. And it's like, well, whatever you got to do. And of course, after I said that, I went, wait a minute, he's buried. He's down 6 feet. How the hell am I going to get a bolt of lightning into this guy? And that was part of the challenge, is coming up with something that also kind of continued the Tommy Jarvis character and let him kind of go nuts when he digs up the grave to burn the body, to be sure he can watch it toast. And in that act that, he loses it, he's stabbing the thing with a spear that was yanked off of a fence. And then, when they walked away to get the gas, down came the lightning, bang, it happened. So figuring that out was a bit of a challenge. And there's times where I go, are you really buying this, you guys? I mean, but we were so kind of over the top with the whole idea of bringing back a body from the dead in that way that people just seemed to go along with the ride and loved the whole Gothic universal monster, which was a huge objective of mine, was that I wanted Jason to be a monster. I did not want him to be just a slasher, human that somehow survives all these attacks that he gets and stuff. He had to be unstoppable. Bullets wouldn't stop him. He's not a zombie. The sheriff shoots him in the head, doesn't kill him. He can just keep going. So I had a lot of these sort of rules I gave myself going into this, that I wanted the film to be unique. And if you never saw Friday the 13th, you could watch this and get the backstory, get the whole idea of this guy going back to Crystal Lake. I made sure that was all in the dialogue, and then make it fun, make it funny, and have, just a good sense of humor about the whole procedure. But it's at the same time got to be scary. The audience has to scream. And in those days, that crowd, they were so verbal to the screen. It was great. So what I did was put in jokes that the audience would provide the punchline. Back then, all the American Express commercials had this cap at the end where you heard somebody go, "Don't leave home without it," and that was sort of the ongoing thing. So when I cut to my ex-wife, underwater in the pond, and you saw the money sink, but the American Express card floated, there was always some guy, usually in the back, with his girlfriend, yelling, "Don't leave home without it," and the whole audience would laugh. He felt like he was a hero, and I went, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to have happen.
Wow, amazing. These stories could go on and on and on. Well, but yeah, I really enjoyed part 6, and you had done an exemplary job in balancing the comedy with the horror. You didn't allow one to become dominant over the other, and
Yeah.
I thought the balance was incredible. All
Thank
right.
you.
So the first Jason actor didn't quite make the cut. All right. So what stood out about CJ Graham, and how did you work with him to establish the undead Jason that fans loved?
Well, we started with an actor actually stuntman, uh,
Mhm.
Dan Bradley. And all the stuff that you see, like the paintball sequence, most of that, I would say probably almost 80% of it was Dan Bradley. And if you look at the body types between him and Jason, you can see Dan is much fuller, much more kind of loping in his way of walking, which is very valid for the way Jason had been portrayed up till then.
Right.
But when Paramount saw the footage of the first day, they went, "Nope, he looks just too dumpy. We're replacing him with your second choice, C.J. Graham." And I was, of course, wait a minute. I've not talked to him. He just left, and he said, yeah, and still to this day, I've not spoken to him because I felt really bad that that happened. But he's gone on to be the highest paid second unit director from the Bond movies through the what's the one that with all the action? Oh shoot, uh, I want to say Rowan. It's not that. Uh, Born Identity movies.
Oh, yeah.
He's the coordinates all those car stunts, all those falls, everything. So he's enormously successful. So he did not do bad at all.
No.
CJ comes in, and I knew he had a presence and a stiffness about him, and it turned out, he's ex-army. So any direction I would give him, he'd say, yes, sir, I can do that. Yes, sir. And he did all his own stunts, which wasn't supposed to happen, but he could do it and he was brave about it. And what I loved working with him on was that almost Terminator kind of, sharp moves when he did
The neck
things.
movements, yes.
And that to me showed that he wasn't quite human, but he wasn't a robot either. He just moved, very fiercely, in the movements. And when he went after somebody, the steps were very methodical, and, CJ just did an amazing, amazing job on that.
And by the way,
And
okay,
so I was hoping he would just continue with the series, but the next director that came in, he was friendly with Kane Hodder as a stuntman. So Kane ended up, taking over and then kind of stayed, with the series for quite a few of the movies.
interesting. And what I was about to say is, by the way, he turned his neck in those scenes, signaled to the person, like, are you talking to me?
Yeah,
How dare you talk to me? And that the drama is coming their way. But
yeah,
yeah, of course, I met C.J. Graham at the convention. He was a polite person. He rolled along with the punches,
yeah.
and we had a good conversation.
He's a great human being on every level.
Hmm. And what I found out that was amazing that he's a little bit bigger than Kane Hodder. So I didn't know that. I thought Kane Hodder was the biggest Jason until
No,
Kurzinger took the part. Here I
yeah.
found out that Graham was just a little bit bigger than Hodder. So that was surprising. I thought he was at least 6'2" or smaller.
Yeah, it all depends on how who's next to him. I was kind of surprised when I met Kane too, because
Uh,
really great guy, really nice. He brought this breathing aspect, to Jason that hadn't been done before. So that was a completely different quality than I had CJ doing on mine.
Well,
But
I met both. I met both Jasons, and I survived. Kane Hodder's a good guy, and we see each other all the time at the Mad Monster Party conventions.
yeah,
And we always have these conversations. So, but anyhow, so let's move on to Date with an Angel. Sounds delectable. I bet this was a good transition or break, from the horror genre, and going into the romantic comedy area, And then I bet you had fun making this film. Is that right?
yeah. I mean, to be flat out honest, that that type of movie, not necessarily that movie, but that's really what I had my sights set on. I wanted to do physical comedy. My background with mime, my love of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and stuff, that, Jacques Tati, his physical, the way he would physicalize these characters that he would come up with. And that was where I was going. And that was right in the middle of what I was when I was trying to get a deal for Date with an Angel is when the Friday the 13th thing came in. And I was sort of like, That's not the kind of movie I want to make right now. I'm busy trying to get this thing going. But, as my agent said, this is going to open in gazillion theaters, come August. I'd seriously think about it, go in there and see if you can do something with it. So that's, of course, part of why it has all the comedy in, because that's really my background. But Date with an Angel is probably the most autobiographical, because I really sort of envisioned, the Jim character that Michael Knight played as kind of my Gary Cooper or Jimmy Stewart type, the good guy that's going to have something happen, which is not so great, which is getting married to Phoebe Cates, you know, obnoxious character, and her father who had planned to just put him into the, you know, perfume and makeup world. And he wanted to be a composer, but he kind of left all that, aside, knowing that his future was going to be this. And an angel comes down, not unlike, Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life, but a gorgeous one, and one with actual wings. And I had Richard Edlin, who did the visual effects and things, make sure that the wings could embrace him, that they had feeling, that they were an extension of her body. They just weren't hung on her back. So there was a lot that I wanted as her as a character. But the hardest thing was casting, to try to find the girl to play this angel, because I wanted you to be able to hear her thoughts, because she's not going to be speaking. And when she does speak, not unlike, the mermaid, in Splash, it's a whole different kind of language. Hers is a little more celestial. And of course, what Daryl Hannah was doing was much more squeaky and, porpoise or whale like, sounding like it came from under the sea. So I could not get this movie made, because at that time, when I first took it around, there was no ET, there was no Splash, none of that sort of fantasy, relationship with a character and a fantasy character quite like that. So it was like, nope, nope, nope. And then suddenly these things started happening. And at that point, having just made my Friday the 13th, and Dino De Laurentiis wanted me to do a horror movie, wanted me to do Sometimes They Come Back, which I eventually ended up doing, you know, gave us the go ahead, to make that movie. So it was like the movie, as I said, the friends are all the exact same names of the guys that I hung out with, the different aspects of their character. But I wanted to basically take a thing that I had from my past, where a really nice guy that I knew kept getting headaches, sometime in his mid 20s, didn't take care of it, and then suddenly died of a brain tumor. And I wanted to have that, without it being a downer, get that information out at the very end. That's why Jim keeps taking the aspirins and all that stuff, so that there was a reason why the angel was coming for him. It wasn't just arbitrary.
Mhm. I remember watching it when I was a little kid, and I enjoyed it. It seemed as though it was always on HBO.
Yeah,
Turn it on, there it was. Of
yeah.
course, Splash, the rest of those good movies. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think high quality movie indeed. And so we're going to go back to horror, and so we're going to go with Stephen King's Sometimes They Come Back. Okay. Now, I saw this. It was a very poignant film where this boy witnesses the murder of his older brother by these other kids. Okay. Only that he eventually gets pursued by them and later on, and they want to kill him. Right. And we got the movie poster right here. There it is right there. And
Mhm.
if you will, please elaborate on this story. And if there's a moral compass, please explain that as well.
Sometimes They Come Back was a short story that Dino got the rights to, and it was, I believe, going to be packaged with Cat's Eye, so that there would be sort of like I don't know, a double bill, where they would split, the movie into two different parts, one story and the other story. But they decided, no, let's keep them separate. And it took
Right.
quite a while before, he had hired writers on to do the adapt the short story into a screenplay. And they were two very reputable writers, who had done Jewel the Nile and some, big Hollywood features. But Dino, thank God, agreed with me that what was missing was sort of the heart of the whole thing, the relationship with the little Jim and his older brother, and that his older brother was very special. And obviously, Tim Matheson, was the absolute perfect choice. I had always had guilty pleasure in love with Brooke Adams, from Days of Heaven. So that the teaming of those guys and just the whole notion that it was a kind of a family drama that he was been suffering for years with this secret that he carried with him, and now he has to go back to this town to teach because it was like the only place that would take him because he had some emotional issues at other schools. So he comes in, as wounded, man, damaged from a past that we only get in bits and pieces. And then, of course, you find out, he was the one responsible for these guys' deaths. And the thing that we did a complete rewrite on the script, and really got in the heart and the family aspects and the emotional, connections. And I was very fortunate to cast those three guys who were just terrific. They, just scary as hell. They were the bullies that I remember in school that used to, pick on me and my friends and stuff, not unlike A Christmas Story. It's like, you get out of the way of these guys because they enjoy torturing, other kids. So that, the combination of all those elements that were a part of King's story, and then we added little things like the car with that looked almost like the Christine car with the fire going out of the back, and the relationship with the kids that had a little of the Stand By Me aspect to it. So when King's son saw it, he said, well, I'd love about it, sort of like, Stephen King's greatest hits all in one movie. I never thought of it that way, but it was just sort of, well, that's that world, that he's always written so well. But the difference is with his books, which is what I love, we are the characters, we hear their thinking. And you can't do too much of that in a film because it's about what you see and the journey you go on with it, and not being told ahead of time. But we had a little bit of the narration, in the beginning of it. So it's that sense of somebody's telling you a story and things that were never the same after this. So I had the benefit of an incredible new composer, Terry Palmieri, who did the score to me that just, as I've told people, if I'm going to have something played at my funeral, that you've got to have that playing some way, somehow, whether it's on a piano or play the track itself, because that's so represented to me what I wanted that movie to feel like. And I know when my son saw the movie years later, he said, it really made him cry because he said, I saw you in this whole thing, not that Tim looked like you or anything, but it all felt like you, which was the highest compliment to me because I really tried to put as much into that because it was a crazy period of my life. My daughter was about to be born. My dad was dying. I had 20 episodes each of two TV series that I was doing with Mick Garris. They came from outer space and She Wolf of London. I was preparing a 5-camera coverage of my best friend's show, Stephen Bagg's Home Entertainment, and prepping this movie all at the same time. I mean, I saw myself passing myself, everything I did seemed like, wait a minute, where am I supposed to be now? But it all kind of worked out. The film had a curse. Something could go wrong every day, and it did. It was like supposed to be, I think, a 26-day schedule. It went to like 37 days, which unheard of in a TV movie. But Dino was a filmmaker and he was going to release this widescreen. So he didn't want the thing to go over budget, but he would get on the phone with me and say, Tom, you making a goddamn good picture? Yes, sir, I am. All right, put the producer back on. Leave him alone. So I really had the benefit of Dino, who was probably the last big movie mogul that we've had, where he
Wow.
made decisions by his feelings.
Wow. Very interesting story. I'll tell you that. but I enjoyed the movie for what it was. I thought it was unique. Seeing these villains from another era, doing their thing in the current era. And it was a big crossover.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I'm sure you've met Stephen King, and if so, what was he like?
Well, well, I should say similar to Alice Cooper, who did, 3 songs in Friday the 13th. I have not met Alice Cooper as Alice Cooper. I knew him when I was 16 and playing in bands, and he was a guy, whose name was Vincent, and I knew he came from Texas, and we would hang out at Frank Zappa's house in the 60s and stuff. Really nice guy. I had no idea he became Alice Cooper. That was the same guy. So, in terms of Stephen King, I have yet to meet Stephen King. I get asked constantly. I do so many interviews about Stephen King. I'm in documentaries and stuff because of this just one movie that I did. So it's like, yeah, I wished I had a relationship like Mick Garris, has, and
Mhm.
he's done a number of his movies. So that's again kind of on my bucket list, along with singing "The Man Behind the Mask" with Alice on stage one night, which he says he wants to do when we finally pair up. So I'm I'm hoping that happens.
Yeah, I take it that sometimes they come back as one of those rare Stephen King movies where King himself does not make a cameo. Obviously, he didn't do it in this situation; otherwise, you would have met him. So, but anyhow, so what was the most challenging project of your career, and how did you overcome the obstacles on the set?
From all the movies, because I've done 43 feature
Right, you've done
films.
43, but is there a particular one that was the most challenging for you to take on and to get done?
Well, truth be told, and I tend to be, more truthful than a lot of people like,
Right?
but the last 2 movies I did were for Lifetime, the Lifetime channel,
Mhm.
and they were uh, stories by Patricia Cornwell. And Patricia Cornwell is like as big as Stephen King, if not bigger, in those kind of romantic detective novels with this character called Scarpetta.
Mhm.
And for all these years, nobody's ever done a Scarpetta movie. I don't know quite why, but now they are, finally. And they have Nicole Kidman playing, Scarpetta, and somebody else, another big name actress is a part of this thing. So finally they're doing that. Finally, she's going to be, known from other than the people that buy her books and get onto a plane and they read them on the plane.
Right.
But she had written 2 stories, one for the London Times and one for the New York Times. And Lifetime decided that they wanted to make both movies simultaneously. My agent said, you got to do this. And I said, let me read the scripts. I said, these are terrible. It's like, where's the writer? Well, he's doing something else in Czechoslovakia. And I said, I, we got to change all this. This is just not going to work. These are not human beings that have been written here. I don't know what he was thinking. He probably was on to another job and just, did not to say anything, awful about him. But there's times where certain writers need somebody to sort of stand over and say, well, we're losing this, we're losing that, because they're trying to get to 120 pages. So stupidly, I agreed to do these 2 movies in Toronto. And literally one day we're shooting part of one movie, another day we're shooting part of the other movie. Same basic characters. Um, had some wonderful actors there, but pretty much every day they'd come to me and go, "Does this make any sense to you?" And I go, "No, let's do something else with it." Because, and then the producer was cutting scenes. It was just awful. And I mean, this is the one time in my life I had a complete like meltdown where I was not running around the set like I normally would do. I was sitting in the director's chair just because I couldn't change anything. The producer was adamant about that. Patricia Cornwell liked the script for some God knows reason. So he kept saying, if she likes it, this is hers, don't mess with it, kind of thing. And it was really, for me, it was like that is not where I want to end my career. But those were the last two things that I did, which was back in, what was that, 2000? No, it was 1999.
Late 90s.
Yeah, it was. Well, it's been like 20 years. So yeah. So and uh, it was one of those things where there's a book on me called A Strange Idea of Entertainment: Conversations with Tom McLoughlin, and I talk about all that and this sort of transition that occurred from, coming up with original things, taking original takes on things like Friday or some of the other movies I did, to suddenly taking on what a lot of directors have said, every so often you're going to pick a bad script or bad idea and do it. And luckily, it disappears with all the good stuff you've done. I didn't want that to happen, but for this, I did it because they were paying the classic ton of money to do two movies simultaneously. But I knew that my heart wasn't there and the process was just mentally debilitating. So I got through them, I survived them. The movies got made, they got released. And I have not looked at them at all since after I finished editing. It was just such a horrible kind of period in my life. Family issues were going on with my family at the same time. I felt like I wasn't taking care of that. It was just kind of like a really hard thing to get up every morning and get in a car and go and get on the set and do it. So without any doubt, that was my kind of dark period. And I've had a number of other movies that started to look like they were going to happen, but something would get in the way. I wrote a sequel to my Friday the 13th called Jason Never Dies, which is 13 years after uh, Jason Lives, where the whole Camp Crystal Lake is completely snowed in from a freak storm that happens, in November. And there's a bunch of, high school girls on a Christian retreat or Catholic retreat with one Irish nun. They're the ones that are in this, Camp Christian Lake, across across the lake from, the original. So it has all the exact same elements, except with a snow setting and girls that are very badass, and they don't know who Jason is. Where the Jason Lives, the girls are all very aware of this famous legend. So I've been trying for almost 4 years to get that made, and it was just because of the rights issue. Door after door after door closed. People wouldn't even read it at any of the studios. So again, I had to kind of put it aside and say, well, maybe one day that'll change. And it's just been, it's kind of a series of not having the kind of luck that you have in the beginning. And I'm not, the young up and coming guy anymore either, but that doesn't stop me from fronting my rock and roll band. And for an hour, I'm out there kicking my own ass, running around doing stunts, doing magic, doing mime, doing visual effects, special effects, fire coming out of my hands, all of that to again be death defying because I'm in no position in my life yet to say I'm done. I've got other movies I got to make. I want to keep this band going. So there's that thing where lots of times when something fails, it lights another fire and a new door opens. So that's been kind of where my life has been, the last few years.
This is from, I'm going to talk to my audience. This guy is a true multitasker. You seem to be involved with all kinds of things besides directing, in terms of entertainment. It's totally amazing. So you've mentioned that Frank Capra was your mentor. And what is the most valuable piece of advice he gave you?
Okay, Frank Capra. Capra was, yes, my mentor. It came because It's a Wonderful Life. The rights dropped out. Nobody picked up the rights. So it was on TV constantly during Christmas because every station could run it for free. Eventually, somebody finally bought the rights and stuff, so that stopped. But I always saw the last scene of It's a Wonderful Life. Have you seen it at Christmas?
Yeah, I've seen it twice with James
Yeah,
Stewart. And,
right.
What
So
movie?
that ending always got to me. I didn't even know the story. I just came in somehow at the ending, and it always made me tear up. And I gotta figure out what this movie is so I can, watch it one day. Well, when I was studying film, in the, kind of, I guess it was early '80s, mid '80s, and no, wait a minute. When was that? It was after I came back from Paris. I was 70, no, mid 70s. I went to the seminar that Frank Capra was at. They showed It's a Wonderful Life. I went, oh my God, that's what it is. And I came up to him afterwards and I said, I have to see your other movies. I have to, I want to have a career that emulates the kind of values and things that you have in your movies. And he goes, well, here's my phone number. Here's my address. Just stay in touch, which I did, which a lot of the Date with an Angel was, from his influence and his notes. And he even gave me a quote for the movie. It's a wonderful movie. I loved it, Frank Capra. Dino didn't think Frank Capra's name meant anything, so he didn't put it on, and which really upset me because I said, if I made a Western and John Ford liked it, you'd want to put that on the box. Nah, this artist doesn't know from a Don John Ford. No, no. So I was always kind of rubbing up against, his own personal taste. But Capra taught me, first off, you like the people up there, you're going to like the movie. If you love them, you're going to love the movie. What you have to do is make sure the villains really have something about them that's understandable, even if it's supernatural. So they're going to be very difficult to beat and have those odds against your likable characters and, make that work. And Capra also had so many just small things like, there are no bad actors, there's only bad directors. And I've repeated that many times to people, and they go, what do you mean? You just hired a bad actor. And I said, then that's your problem. You've hired the wrong actor for a part that they're not capable of doing. Or if they're not the right actor, you've got to get in there and work with them. Whatever you have to do to change the script, change their attitude, whatever, you've got to make them look as good as possible. We experienced movies through the people we see on the screen, not the fancy shots, not the colors. All of that helps and affects it, but ultimately we have to identify, you know, with these characters up there. So Capra really made the most amount of sense to me in my aesthetics. So even in horror, if you don't care about this girl, you don't care if she dies or not. But if you do, it's much more horrifying and much more, oh, please don't do that. Oh, no. So I come along with my Friday the 13th and I have children, and people are going, he's not going to kill the kids. He's not going to do that, is he? No one's ever put kids in before, but my intentions were never to. They were just something that we hadn't seen before, and it also gave more fear to the movie by having them there. And the bonus was how many kids saw my Friday the 13th and identified with the kids. So it became their favorite horror movie because it had kids in it, that they felt like they could relate.
Mhm. Interesting, very interesting. And sounds like he was very, very inspirational in your life.
Yeah.
Helped you become what you are now. And
Yeah.
it probably wasn't for him, we probably wouldn't have gotten these great movies. So after 4 decades in the industry, what is your take on the current state of horror movies compared to the 1980s?
They're much smarter. They are the result of a generation that's grown up watching a lot of movies. Some, like some were influenced by John Carpenter's Halloween, which really, was a good thing to be influenced by. Some, of course, went for the gore movies, the total over the top stuff. And their movies kind of reflect that. It's like they're as good as the gore sequence and not necessarily so good with everything else. But to me, the big difference was when the Koreans started making horror movies because their influence was they saw our stuff and then they processed, through their aesthetics and their way of thinking. And it was a much smarter, more subtle horror. And as a result, bang, America made The Ring and what was the water one? The blanking on the name of it, but there was at least 5 or 6 or 7 big movies that were Korean horror movies that were remade here. And I know when I first got turned on to them by my son, who was a huge fan of Asian movies, period, I was going, these things are smart. They're far more involving, and I think those influences too have helped. The best scary movie I've seen in a number of years is Oz Perkins' Longlegs. And I've probably seen that, I don't know, 10 times now, you know, most of the time in the theater because I wanted to feel with an audience a lot of what's there. But a movie should reflect its creator in some way, shape, or form. And in Oz Perkins' case, have you seen Long Legs?
Not yet. I heard some good reviews.
Yeah, you should really see it because it's an experience kind of movie that if you just give yourself into it, it really takes you in a different, brain set. Just everything he did really reflected a young man who went through a lot of stuff because there's an aspect to the movie. I'm not going to give away anything, but there's a betrayal aspect to the lead character, something that she was never told, and something that has huge impact. As we're watching the current, present day story, and Oz Perkins' father was Tony Perkins, Anthony Perkins from Psycho. And he was a big star, but his mother never explained that he was a gay man. And when Oz found out later on, it was like, why didn't you ever tell me that? Why didn't he ever tell? He just felt like this is not his father, So there was that whole sense of feeling like he was lied to, and it affected him. Not that it made him crazy or anything, but it was deep. A number of years later, his mom died in 9/11. She was on one of those planes. So
Wow.
now he's part of a massive worldwide tragedy. And it's like, how you feeling? How you doing? And so that loss in both directions, one just, I don't know you, and the other physically, you feel that. I certainly do. Through that movie of there's something really unsettling, something that the way he does the shots, the things that kind of appear in the background. There's so many things that he has made really a special movie that I couldn't necessarily point to another movie and say, yeah, he's just trying to rip that off. Not at all. It's its own thing, and it's going to be, a classic for many, many years.
I'm sure. When it comes to modern horror movies, because you just asked me if I watched Long Legs, it's still on my A list. I'm deeply engrossed in the Purge series by James DeMonico.
Mhm.
What's your take on that series? Because I really like it. It's got zip, it's got momentum, holds your interest.
It's good. I mean, it's a great concept right from the gate. The first one, I was really kind of like taken aback in a good way, in that it's like, well, this is a fresh idea. This is scary. It's got elements of killer coming to your home, but
Dystopian.
killers and who do you trust? Who do you believe? I mean, so it just had a lot of good things. Like most movies, including like the recent Scream, it's so hard to do the formula and try to fool the audience, again, or do something that's fresh and still on the mark with what you expect to see. And the ones where it's like you don't go backwards, but you make a left turn in such a way, it's like, oh, I never thought that could happen, but it makes sense. It's not just, Jason Goes to Tennessee, or, Scream done with a whole different cast or whatever. They're still remaining true to what it is and what made it successful. And the big irony for me was I was offered Scream. It was at that time it was called Scary Movie, and Kevin Williamson's script. sent to it. It was sent to me by my agent. I started reading it, which is the whole Drew Barrymore scene, and going, I kind of did this already, sort of satirizing the horror genre at the same time making a horror movie. So I passed. And about 6 months went by, and I read so much crap that I went back to my agent. I said, "Is that, scary movie still around?" It's like, "No, Wes Craven grabbed it." And I go, "Oh, okay, well, he'll do a good job." And of course, it went on to be massive hit after hit after hit. And years later, I had a meeting with Kevin Williamson on some TV series that he was doing. And I, found that sort of, ironic. But at a certain point at the end of the meeting, he said, "I got to tell you something truthfully." He said, "Your Friday the 13th, Jason Lives had such an impact on me when I wrote Scream." I said, "You mean Scary Movie?" "Yeah, yeah." "Oh, you know that was called Scary Movie?" I said, "Yeah." "Yes, I turned it down." He said, "You did?" I said, "Yeah, because I felt I did this sort of, you did something very different with it, obviously, than a Jason movie, but I just felt I would be treading on that same ground again. And I wanted to really do something completely different, which of course was Date with an Angel. But I thought, well, here's the guy that said no to something because it just didn't feel like the right decision. And then you find out, well, part of that was, he was influenced by me on that thing. And it was sort of the first time meta horror was beginning. I never knew the term, and I don't think they even bandied it around in the '80s. But um, where you're making a movie, but you're also making fun of the whole genre itself.
Mhm. Well, I feel that had you taken on that Scream project, it would have been a better movie because your ideas are just better than most other directors that I've seen over the years. Just
Thank
want
you.
absolutely.
It's like for me, you can't argue with success. I've gone to, I mean, every Thursday, and tonight will be another one of those nights. I think we're going to go see what's it called? The Underneath or Underneath something. I saw some trailers and it really looks like they're doing stuff with sound as a scary element. And, I have a girlfriend who loves horror even more than me, grew up through the '80s. So she knows all the dialogue from all these movies. She knows all the players. She knows which one was in this movie. I mean, she knows pretty much everything other than what they had for lunch every day. But she's right aboard if it's like 10 o'clock, and I go, "You want to go see so and so? Yeah, let's go." And luckily, I have a theater 5 minutes away, an AMC, and get part of their 3 movies a week that you can see for one price a month, and it's just too good to not do on a regular basis. And we also go on Thursday because it's the hardcore people are there. I mean, they've been waiting for this thing, and as soon as they find out there's an early screening before the opening on Friday, they're there, which always is interesting because either they're going to be very cynical and opinionated, or they're going to jump out of their seats and go, "This is great." And I love that, having that experience with nobody telling me anything about the movie ahead of time. Just go. So yeah, that today's movies have, to me, a lot of. I mean, I thought was amazing. I saw the miniseries, thought it was okay. Thought Tim was amazing, but the new it and its sequel was brilliant. And even the Welcome to Derry, I found for a TV movie or TV series really intense, and the acting was great. So that same guy, Brad, who was showrunner for it, is doing the Crystal Lake series for Peacock and for A24. I'm hoping he puts that same intelligence and stuff into the early days of Jason and his mom. And, it's like something I would have loved to do, but I wasn't part of that world. That's a whole other, generation and thing. So, a lot of us who had done the earlier movies, it's sort of like, sit down, Pop. You had your turn. Now it's also like, a lot of my contemporaries hate that. And I said, hey, we were those guys at one point. We were going, "Excuse me, boys, get out of the way. Let the young guys come in here." So I get it. I can't be bitter about it. all I can do is go in there and go, that was great, that was smart, or why are they copying the thing we just saw that movie, before? And so it's when I was teaching film for 10 years at Chapman Dodge, it was a constant look. I'm not here to teach you anything. All I'm trying to do is hopefully inspire you to find in yourself something personal, or your mother, your daughter, your kids, your best friends, that you can say, this is me. So if you're going to steal from Kubrick and do those kinds of shots, make it your own in terms of the circumstances, what the characters are doing. You can still use whatever technique if it's appropriate for that genre, but it's about being inspired so that you go in and go, all right, I've seen this. What could be a different way of looking at this? So I'm always kind of looking for that wonderful, boy, I wish I had thought of that, kind of moment. And it's great when that happens.
It really is. Now, before we wrap it up, I got a couple more questions. Okay. Now, if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give about breaking into the entertainment industry?
At 18,
Sure.
well, that's kind of like, end of high school, going into college, um, which I was a rock and roller during those years. And then at 19 is where I made the shift off to Paris. So I don't have any personal experience in that sort of decision. It kind of was a natural evolution in my career. I have certainly talked and coached and tried to inspire hundreds of young filmmakers over the years with the same thing that I just said. What do you love? What is it that makes you love movies, or this particular kind of movie, or just this movie itself? And find a way that, if you really love it, find a way to do your version of that, even if it's just on an iPhone, with your friends, and you make it as good as you can so you can experience that from head to screen. And I love that we now basically, it's not about, to me, movies, film, digital, whatever. It's about what's on the screen. This new vertical cinema, whatever they're calling it, vertical something, where they make these movies or these TV series things, and it's about keeping it in that format, which I personally hate, but it's working for a generation that just loves to look at
Ratio?
them.
Is that what you're alluding to, like an aspect ratio?
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, but if you've seen any of those things, yeah, they fit perfectly in a, you're on your cell phone, and all of them, from what I've been hearing, because I've only seen bits and pieces of stuff, always have some sort of sexual aspect to it. So you can shoot in rooms, you can make it, steamy relationships, almost like soap operas, but
Mhm.
done very cheaply, but very professionally, because there's a lot of pros out there that aren't working, so they're more than happy to go in there and do that. But at the same time, to me, it's like, if you have something to say, what a great place to say it. Not that you're trying to give a message, but it's something to say about your in you're insecure with what's going on in the world. I mean, I was teaching during COVID, and I was saying to these kids, grab onto this, make move with the fucking masks on. It's like, I don't want, I'm telling you, these things will become classic years from now, because it's like, you remember that period? Oh, you remember, it's like looking at the 50s. Oh, I remember that jacket, oh, I remember that hairstyles. The nostalgia is what draws people, back into their own worlds. So if you take periods that are incredibly emotionally affecting to the world, like in the case this was, what can you say about that? And I think there was a movie called Host that they actually made, for online, and it was as scary as hell. And it was all about all the people on the screens that were all connected and get together every Friday night and talk to each other, and then something horrific happens, and the effects, everything was really good. And I thought, well, they took their limitation and they made something with it. And to me, that's the key, is wherever you are in life. I don't care if you're 14 or you're 74, if you have something that you really want to do, and again, steal steal from other people, not like friends and things, but filmmakers that, had an effect on you. They say artists steal, hacks borrow. Oh no, I didn't do that. Or, oh, well, I just borrowed a little bit. Just fucking admit it. Martin Scorsese does. All the good guys go, yeah, I got that from this 40s movie. There's nothing wrong with saying what inspired you, and that's the result of that inspiration. 99% of the audience that sees it will not see that. Another filmmaker, will go, oh, I see what you did there. So what? It's like magic. Magicians can call each other out on how they did the tricks. But for the rest of us chumps, that was incredible. I don't know how he did it, but it was incredible. It's the same thing to me with movies. It's an illusion. And you're trying to create something that's really either disturbing or funny or weird or whatever. It's going back to my heroes like John Ford, when they asked him, what is a movie? What does a movie need to be? And he said three things: emotion, emotion, emotion. First time I heard that, I went, well, that's easy to go get out. And then as time gone on, that's exactly it. If you don't emotionally touch us in some way, shape, or form, and all we're thinking about is, geez, I should get back, because if I don't go to sleep, you're not involved. Your emotions are not there, and you want to create things that have an effect so people stay there and watch the screen. And if you're lucky, you influence them in their own lives. I have repeatedly said Rocky, that last round in Rocky, where he gets knocked down and he's pulling himself up on the ropes, and Mickey, his trainer, going, stay down. But he doesn't. He pulls himself up and he goes the distance as he stated he wanted to. I don't want to win. I just want to go the distance. And that always comes up whenever I feel like I've been beaten down, especially in show business. I think about that. That comes in. It's a Wonderful Life comes in. There's so many things that I feel like I get insight from the movies. And what I ask of students or other people is just, do the same. Find stuff that's true to you. I promise you there's going to be somebody in Russia, somebody in South America that has gone through the same thing, but in a different way. But it's still the same emotion that's coming through. And that's what you want to do, is touch the audience in some way.
Hmm, very interesting. Wow. Okay, so you did write a book. Okay, it's on the market right now. It's on Amazon. We're going to go pull that up to show the audience what it looks like. And here it is.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it briefly in your spiel. And this gives us a more in-depth, a better idea of who you are, what your background consists of, and so forth. Correct?
Yep. It goes from, birth all the way through up to when I went back into rock and roll again in 2011. Got the old band back together, the ones that were still alive. And we kind of accomplished the dream that we wanted to do when we were 16 and 17 years old. But we didn't get the real opportunity until we were in our 60s. And people were going, you kidding? You're going to try to do rock and roll at your ages? And it's like, why not? You know, we're going to do music from the 60s with a bunch of 60-year-olds who still love to entertain and who still feel that there is something to say at our age, even if it's referring to relationships or feeling like, the only way I'm going to get out of this problem is I got to get fired so that I actually, get money, social collect unemployment or whatever you got to do. There's different things that happen for us at different ages, but there's a lot that's exactly the same, particularly in relationships. And the world has changed a lot, obviously, with how the laws of socialization and things. But when it gets right down to it, nothing hurts more than a broken heart. And nothing is funnier than something that you go, oh God, I remember when I did something like that, where you you do something that just, it's so universal. Everybody kind of knows it, and the whole audience laughs at the same time, which is incredible.
Absolutely. Okay. So I will be getting the book. Okay, I'll be reading it. I'll be very busy reading it, and I know I'm going to enjoy it. All right. So Tommy McLoughlin. All right. It was a pleasure. I wish you a blessed night, and that's it for Horror Talks Live. And thank you for joining in. And I'll see all of you next time. Good night.